Hi kids, these are the notes on the structure and content of Hard News. I'm changing the font to Times New Roman because that's what all our font should be, because that's required in most of our English class writing. Okay, so here's what I want you to know about the way that Hard News is structured. By structure, I mean how it's put together. So, for example, if we were going to talk about essay structure, we would probably talk about the first paragraph being an introduction, and then there being several body paragraphs, and then the last paragraph being the conclusion. That's how an essay is built. That's its structure. The structure of Hard News stories is really specific. It doesn't matter what hard news story you're reading, there is a really specific format for how you structure hard news, and it goes like this. The first paragraph gives the essential information. First paragraph. And that essential information is usually the who and the what. Who could be a person or it could be an organization. Like Ridgewood Schools will close, right? The who in that statement is Ridgewood Schools, and the what is the thing they're doing, closing, right? So who is the subject and what is the verb? So the first paragraph is going to start with who, the subject, and it's going to immediately tell you the verb, and then maybe a couple more words. A lot of times the first paragraph is just one sentence, occasionally two. The first paragraph of a hard news story is the least amount of information that you would need to know in order to be informed about this story. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Hard news stories are written in almost the opposite way of a novel or a short story. In a novel or a short story, the author's trying to draw you through the story. The author is enticing you to turn the pages. In a hard news story, the author is actually doing the reverse. The author's trying to make it as easy as possible for you to get in and out of the story extremely quickly. So the most important info is right at the beginning. And then as you go down through the story, the facts get less and less important. All right, so second paragraph, that's this blank here. The second paragraph expands the essential info. So it will give you more information about the who or the subject, and it will give you more information about the what, the thing the subject did, the verb. Often the second paragraph will tell you when the thing happened and where it happened, and very occasionally when and where are in the first paragraph if they're really important to the story. But you'll usually find when and where in the second paragraph. And the following paragraphs, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, give information that is gradually less and less important. Gradually less and less important. So if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see this image, inverted pyramid. If you opened a new tab and just searched inverted pyramid style and clicked on images, you would see pictures like this all over the place. So this is the beginning of the hard news story. At the beginning, you put information the reader has to have for the communication, the article to be successful. And then farther in, additional info that's helpful, but not crucial, not important. And then at the end of the news story, stuff it's like fun facts. Like if they've read this far, this might be interesting to them. So the crucial info has to go at the beginning. And then here's the key idea. The reader should be able to stop reading the hard news story at any point and still be informed. The reason we shape it like this is we're trying to express the width. So this inverted pyramid, this upside down pyramid, the wide part up here expresses the idea that this is the really important part of the story. So as this image of the inverted pyramid getting narrower as you go through the story, that means the info becomes less and less important. So here are facts that you're going to learn in a hard news story, and this chart's going to be super useful for you when you start to write your hard news story. Who did it will be usually the first word of the headline, and it'll also be in the first paragraph. It's often, if not always, the first word of the first paragraph. What was done, the verb, the what, comes right after the subject in the headline. Subject is the who. I'll add that right here. And it's also in the first paragraph. When and where it happened are in the first or second paragraph. Occasionally they might be pushed down to the third, but very rarely. And you might also learn why it happened and how it happened. And if you do, they're only at the beginning of the news story if that's what the story is. But that's rarely what the story is, because remember that hard news is current, right? It's news that happened very recently. And when, as a journalist, you're reporting on something that happened recently, it's very rarely the case that you know why it happened or how it happened. Like if it just happened a few hours ago and you're writing about it, a lot of times you don't know why or how. All you know is who and what and when and where. So it's why and how often are completely missing from hard news stories. When they're in them, they're often near the end. But it's occasionally the case that it is the story itself. In that case, it would be at the beginning. Paragraphs. Hopefully you saw this in the hard news activity where you were reading hard news stories. Paragraphs are 1 or 2 sentences long. Almost never longer than that. Every once in a while, you'll find a paragraph with 3 sentences in it, but that is rare. Paragraphs are short. So source quotes, that's a quote directly from somebody who knows firsthand about the news event, like somebody who witnessed the news event or did the news event, right? They are often included in hard news stories, not often, but always. And if they are included, they're usually going to be in the 3rd paragraph or farther down, almost never higher than the 3rd paragraph. The story will tell you who and what and when and where in the 1st and 2nd paragraph, usually. And then if you're going to get a source quote, the highest up it would be usually is the 3rd paragraph. And it gets its own paragraph. Almost never do you see other sentences in the paragraph with the source quote. So here's some notes about the content that I think that is going to be familiar to you, right? Hard news is only ever about current events. We already know this, hopefully, current events. Though please recall that current is relative, right? So what's current to somebody on the internet is not necessarily current to somebody who's just reading paper news. The tone of hard news writing is emotionless. You could also put cold, serious, robotic, purely factual, any of those things. Shouldn't be any emotion in the tone. The tone is what the voice of the speaker of the news sounds like in your head. Like when you read it to yourself in your head, what voice are you hearing? That voice should sound totally unemotional. As I've said before, news can't ever really be truly free of bias, but hard news does strive, that means it tries hard, to present only facts. And in a hard news story, you should never read language that implies a judgment. Unless it's a judgment that literally everyone on earth would agree with. So if there was like a terrible, terrible accident where like a bus full of kittens and nuns and 6-year-olds went off a cliff, right? You couldn't really say that the hard news story was breaking any rules if it described the accident as shocking, right? That in that case, that's not a judgment. Like literally everyone would be shocked by that news story. But almost all the time, hard news stories are going to strive to avoid that kind of language. When they are including it, it's usually a sign of bias, which we have talked about. Let's just quickly go over here and look at a couple of the example news stories that you read and see how they're demonstrating the principles that I talked about. Let's see. Here's this LAPD cop charged with shooting cop pal. All right, so remember I said first paragraph gives the essential info, who, what, and a couple more words. Here's who, LAPD officer, and what, was shot. And we are also getting a little more information about it in the first paragraph, that his assailant, the person who shot him, was somebody else who is a member of the force, and where it happened. In this particular hard news story, the reporter decided that where was important enough to include in the first paragraph. Second paragraph expands the essential info. So first paragraph, we found out he was an LAPD officer. Now we're getting more. He was 48. First paragraph, we found out he was shot. Now we learn more about that. Was shot in the shoulder, right? So expands the info about the who, expands the info about the what, and has a little bit more. This news story has, there's a source quote. This is what a source quote looks like. Remember I said it almost always gets its own paragraph? This is a quote from the chief of the LA police that would count as a source because he has firsthand knowledge of what happened. And it is in what paragraph? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember I said a source quote is almost never going to appear higher than the third paragraph. Let's look at this one. It's called, got so many things popping up. Oh, there was an earthquake in Delaware, shaking parts of New Jersey. So who? An earthquake. Remember, who isn't always a person, sometimes it's like a thing. So who was the earthquake and what did it do? It shook parts of New Jersey. And then here we get also the when, Thursday, in the first paragraph in this news story. Sometimes the when appears there. Now, second paragraph, we're going to learn more about the who and the what. So we learn that the earthquake is rare, and we learn that it could be felt in these areas. And we actually learn more about the when, not just Thursday, but 4:45 p.m. on Thursday. And then here's some more about the who, some more about the earthquake. Here we've got a source quote in the fourth paragraph, introduced with just a little bit of setup here. I wouldn't really count that as being a separate sentence. And then if we look at these two stories and look at the end, remember I said the stuff that comes at the end of a news story is like, oh, if you read this far, you might be interested to know. At the end of this news story about the LAPD cop getting shot, there is, this sentence says, early Sunday morning for reasons still under investigation, Ishmael Tamayo shot the victim, striking him in the upper body. Actually, I'm kind of wondering why that one is at the very end. That seems kind of important, doesn't it? Oh, I just realized this is the last sentence. The guy who shot him was put in jail and is on bail for $1 million. That makes more sense. That's sort of like the fun fact. Like, hey, if you're interested in this story, by the way, the guy who shot him is in jail now on $1 million bail. But it's not the main point of the story. The main point of the story is the guy, the LAPD cop, was shot. And then here, the earthquake story, what's our very last sentence? The very last sentence is, people throughout the region took to social media. Is that the end of it? Yeah. So if you read this far, you might be interested to see what some people said about it on social media. Be nice if they have it, but not crucial. You don't have to have these facts in order to be informed about this earthquake. All right. That's it. Have a good one.